I didn't plan to get involved in anyone's life, especially not his. Everything started because I simply wanted to help. That was all. Nothing more. At least that's what I kept telling myself. My own home had turned into a place where conversations were short, touches were accidental, and love felt like a faded photograph hanging crooked on a wall. I didn't hate my life, but I had stopped feeling seen inside it. And when you go long enough without being seen, even a small moment of attention feels like sunlight after weeks of rain. He came into my life quietly, without any intention of changing anything. He needed guidance, nothing dramatic, just someone to listen, someone to steady him when he felt overwhelmed with everything unfolding around him. I offered help because it felt natural, almost automatic. I didn't think twice. He wasn't supposed to become important. But some people slip into your life softly and suddenly you're paying attention to the way their voice steadies when you reassure them, or how they pause before thanking you, as if holding on to the moment a little longer than necessary. The first time I noticed something shift was when he looked at me the way no one had in a long time, not with desire but with genuine gratitude, like he finally felt understood. That look stayed with me longer than it should have. I tried to brush it off, but it lingered in the back of my mind, replaying itself when I tried to sleep. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was just tired. I told myself a lot of things. His messages started coming more often, not in a demanding way but in a way that made it obvious he trusted me. He asked for advice. He asked how my day was. He asked things no one at home had bothered to ask in months. I kept replying because it felt harmless. Felt good to be valued. Maybe that was the real beginning of everything. Not a moment, but a slow return of warmth I didn't realize I'd been missing. One evening, he admitted he didn't know who else to talk to. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to pull away, to create distance before things wandered into territory neither of us could justify. Another part of me, the lonely, neglected, quietly aching part, felt drawn to that vulnerability in him. I told myself I was helping. That single excuse became the cover I hid behind. He started noticing things about me no one else did. The way my voice changed when I tried to stay strong, the pauses I made before answering difficult questions, the slight sigh I didn't realize I let out when I felt exhausted. He noticed, and that scared me more than anything. Because once someone sees you clearly, pretending becomes impossible. I kept telling myself I could control the situation. I could stay within boundaries. But connection doesn't ask for permission, just grows. And before I realized it, I stopped helping him out of kindness, and started helping him because being near him made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in far too long. I kept telling myself I could step back whenever I wanted, but the truth was I didn't want to. Not anymore. Every time he reached out, something inside me responded before my mind had a chance to raise any warnings. What began as quick, simple check-ins slowly turned into long, unhurried conversations that stretched into the late hours, those hours when everything is quieter, and honesty becomes easier to slip into. I noticed how I started waiting for those conversations, how the sound of his notification pulled me out of moods I didn't even know I was in. He had a way of talking that made me forget about everything happening around me. He didn't rush, didn't judge, didn't interrupt. I told him things I hadn't admitted to myself, let alone said out loud. He listened closely, responding in a way that made me feel like every word mattered. And maybe that was the moment I should have been more careful, because once someone becomes your commonplace, distance becomes harder to create. The shift wasn't sudden, but it was unmistakable. One night, after he told me he had been struggling again, he admitted something quietly, as if the words weighed too much. He said he didn't want to depend on me but didn't know how to stop. I stared at the message longer than I should have, feeling a pull I didn't want to acknowledge. I typed and deleted my reply 3 times before finally telling him he wasn't a burden. I told him he mattered. I told him he deserved someone in his corner. I never expected that my words would bring silence on his side, deep, heavy silence that lasted long enough for doubt to creep in. When he finally responded, his message was short but revealing. He thanked me, but not casually the way people thank each other daily. It was the kind of thank you layered with unspoken emotion, the kind that admits something real without saying it. I felt my chest tighten because I knew that moment had crossed an invisible line. Still innocent, still explainable, yet undeniably charged. After that, things weren't the same. Our conversations carried an undertone neither of us named. His voice changed when we talked. Softer, warmer. careful in a way that felt personal. He started picking up on my moods before I said a word, asking if I had eaten, if I was resting, if something had upset me that day. Those small questions shouldn't have mattered, but they did. They mattered too much that I realized how deep I had slipped when he told me he trusted me more than anyone else. The confession wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost accidental, but it hit me harder than it should have. I should have pulled back then. I should have created space. Instead, I leaned in. One evening, while telling him about something that had frustrated me, I paused mid-sentence. He noticed instantly. He said my name differently, gentle, steady, grounding. Just hearing it made me feel understood in a way I hadn't felt in years. I didn't say anything after that, but in the silence between us, I felt the truth settle. This wasn't just help anymore. It wasn't just comfort. And resisting, really resisting, was becoming something I wasn't sure I could do much longer. I kept trying to convince myself that nothing irreversible had happened yet, that everything between us was still contained within words and moments and feelings that could be denied if necessary. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Every time he opened up to me, every time I let him see a part of me I kept hidden from everyone else, the distance between us thinned until it felt like a fragile thread we were both pretending not to tug. And then came the day when that thread finally snapped. It happened after a long week for both of us. He had been overwhelmed, and I had been carrying a weight I didn't know how to put into words. I reached out to check on him first, something I had never done before. He seemed surprised but relieved, and for the first time, he let everything spill out without filtering it. Hearing how defeated he sounded made something inside me ache, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, instinctive way that made me want to be closer than I knew was wise. Later that evening, he asked if he could call, just for a minute. I should have said no. I knew it even as I said yes. His voice came through shakier than usual, softer, like he was afraid the wrong breath would break whatever stability he had left. I told him I was there and he grew silent. Not the uncomfortable kind of silence, but the kind where emotions speak louder than words. When he finally said my name, it wasn't the way he usually said it. It carried gratitude, relief, and something more. Something we'd both been trying not to acknowledge. I felt the shift immediately. My pulse quickened. My voice softened without me meaning to. And suddenly, the conversation turned into something far more vulnerable than anything before. He told me he didn't understand why he felt drawn to me like this. Why he found comfort in me he couldn't find anywhere else. I should have redirected the conversation. Instead, I admitted that I felt the same connection. The moment the words left my mouth, I felt both fear and relief intertwine. There was no taking them back. The line we'd spent weeks tiptoeing around vanished. The honesty between us deepened rapidly, pulling us into a space where we were no longer just offering help or comfort. We were sharing emotions we had no right to share. He confessed he had been holding back for my sake. I confessed I had been doing the same. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand declarations. It was simple, raw truth spoken quietly in the dim hours of night. He told me he wished things were different. I didn't answer right away because the truth echoed inside me louder than anything he had said. I wished the same. And admitting that, even silently, felt like crossing the point of no return. When the call ended, neither of us said goodbye. The silence that followed wasn't distance. It was acknowledgement. We had crossed a boundary we couldn't undo. And the guilt settled in just as strongly as the pull toward him. I sat there for a long time afterward, realizing that the moment I had been trying to avoid had already happened long before I noticed it. In the days that followed, nothing felt normal anymore. Every routine moment carried a quiet heaviness, like the air just before a storm. I found myself moving through the house carefully, almost cautiously, afraid that one wrong thought might show on my face. Nothing had physically happened, yet the emotional weight of what we shared pressed against my conscience more intensely than I imagined it would. It was no longer something I could brush away as harmless connection. We both knew it. And that knowledge changed everything. He didn't message me the next morning. At first I thought he needed space, maybe time to process the same guilt that had been lingering in my chest. But when the silence stretched through the afternoon, I realized he was waiting for me to decide what this meant. I didn't know how to decide anything. I had feelings I wasn't supposed to have, emotional closeness I wasn't allowed to admit, and a growing fear of ruining lives simply because I had been longing for something I thought I'd forgotten. being understood. When his message finally appeared, it wasn't long or emotional. He asked if I was okay. Just that. Simple. Gentle. Careful. I stared at the words, feeling the pull of everything we had shared, but this time mixed with a sharp awareness of consequences. I answered honestly for the first time. I told him I wasn't okay. I told him everything felt heavier than I expected. I told him the truth scared me. He replied quickly, saying he didn't want to cause damage, that he respected me too much to let this turn into something that left scars. I believed him. He was struggling just as much as I was, and that somehow made it both harder and easier. Harder because the feelings were real, easier because neither of us wanted to be reckless with them. We agreed to create distance, even though the idea of pulling away felt like tearing something fragile that had barely had time to exist. The first day was difficult. The second day felt worse. I found myself missing the presence he offered, the steady certainty in his voice, the way he seemed to understand my unspoken thoughts. But I also understood why the distance was necessary. Wanting something didn't make it right, and losing control of emotions didn't justify acting on them. Over time, the conversations became less frequent. Not cold, not bitter, just careful, respectful, mature in a way that felt painfully responsible. He still checked on me occasionally, and I did the same, but the tone had shifted back to something safer. We both made sure of it. I didn't confess anything at home. Not because I wanted to hide, but because the feelings I had experienced taught me something I needed to learn quietly. I realized how much emotional absence can push someone toward the nearest warmth, even when they never intended to seek it. I realized that loneliness can disguise itself as strength until the right voice unmasks it. And I realized that connection, once tasted, can become harder to control than desire ever could. The story didn't end with a dramatic goodbye or a perfect resolution. It ended with awareness, with honesty to myself, with the understanding that I had been vulnerable, and he had simply appeared at the moment I felt that vulnerability most deeply. I didn't regret helping him. I regretted how easy it was to forget myself in the process. And even now, when his name crosses my mind, it comes with a quiet mix of gratitude and ache, because some people come into your life not to stay, but to show you what you've been ignoring within yourself for far too long.